Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order of the Finance Committee. Today's Wednesday, January 11th. The time is now 6:32 p.m. In attendance, we have committee members, myself, Joseph Kotovic, Chair, committee member Michael Macarone, member of the Board of Education and Chair of the Board of Education, Ms. Bobby Brown, and we've got Ms. Marlene Siegel and various staff online as well. Thank you all for joining. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes dated September 29th, 2022. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please? Mr. Macarone. Can you hear us, Mr. Macaron? You're still on mute if you're trying to speak.
Okay.
I need a motion to approve.
Say it again, Joe. I'm sorry.
No worries. I need a motion to approve the minutes dated September 29th, 2022.
I approve the minutes.
I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carried. All right, awesome. Okay, next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on committee goals for 2022-23 school year. Ms. Baptiste Perez. Let the record reflect Ms. Baptiste Perez has entered the building, and she's also a committee member. And now we are on the second agenda item. Discussion on possible action on committee goals for 2023. I prepared a little of something, and everybody's welcome to give input and advice, suggestions, yes and no no's. Here's what I prepared. Finance Committee will strive to deliver an on-time, balanced budget, seek to increase participation and advocacy from board members, parents, students, and the community at large. The committee will also endeavor to highlight the perils of becoming fiscal cliff and start planning for the coming potential shortfalls should we not receive adequate funding. The committee will also seek to increase the public's confidence in the integrity of the budget process through increased transparency and the scrutiny of the budget process. Any comments or questions or additions or subtractions? Ms. Baptiste Perez?
Do you have a written copy? That works.
I can send it out to everybody as well. I just actually just typed it up. It's been in my head, so.
I think, well, one of the comments that I would like to just add is from the first point, the Finance Committee will strive to deliver an on-time balanced budget to seek to increase participation and advocacy from board members, parents, students, and the community at large. Either a sub-point and hold elected officials accountable. And we can do that by showing that our state elected representatives, our budget only increased by $15,000, but yet several state representatives and senators had mentioned $188 million, not showing that the change was only $15,000. So it's false marketing to our community. And so to hold that out and to be very clear that we didn't get any money from the state, and to hold those other elected officials, which I can assume be part of the community at large, but be very specific towards them because their elections are on a 2-year cycle.
So how about that was a mouthful.
I would add as transparency with state representatives and senators with the increased budget coming into our school district and advocacy on their part. So we as a board would try to meet with them to get more money for the schools, but also if there's an inability to get meaningful funds, we're transparent with the community at large that essentially we did not receive any money from the state, and define who the state is, because the state is not just Ned Lamont, but it's our representatives too.
Right, but the advocacy is going to have to be state and local. Local is definitely.
Well, yeah, it's a combination. So I
Yeah.
could type
I'm
that up.
looking, yeah, I'm looking for like a set, let's set, can you encompass it in like a sentence or something? Cause it's like,
Well, the finance committee will seek to work in a collaborative effort with state and local officials to obtain additional funds,
in conjunction.
and the board will be transparent to the actual funds being received in the district, because the actual will clarify that, we just got $15,000. That's nothing to brag about. I apologize because that's just coming off the top of my
Right.
head, so.
In conjunction with state.
I'll also type it and send it to you.
We'll also, yeah, just trying to inform the public. We'll also seek to inform the voting public we'll seek to inform the public of the voting history in regards to education financing of elected officials.
You want to say that clearly for the record?
Yeah, I guess. Okay, I got in conjunction. Oh, wait, you know what? Let's hold off on the in conjunction with public of the voting record of, let's hear from Mr. Macarone and Ms. Brown first, and then read it all once. Of elected officials in regards to education finance. Mr. Macarone, anything to
Yes.
add? Anything to add, subtract?
No, nothing at all, but I agree with what we're saying.
Ms. Brown?
I think you both hit it on the head. I was definitely going to speak on the advocacy side, so I'm glad Ms. Baptiste Perez really broke it down about the accountability side of things. So I support what you guys just mentioned.
Ms. Siegel, anything here you don't see that you would like to see included?
I think you have a comprehensive list of goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now I'll read it all into the record and then ask for a vote for approve. Okay, in conjunction with state and local officials, the Finance Committee will strive to deliver an on-time, balanced budget, seek to increase participation and advocacy from board members, parents, students, and the community at large. It will also seek to inform the public of the voting records of elected officials in regards to education finance. The committee will also endeavor to highlight the perils of the coming fiscal cliff and start planning for coming potential shortfalls should we not receive adequate funding. The committee will also seek to increase the public's confidence in the integrity of the budget process through increased transparency and scrutiny of the budget process. Can I have a motion to approve the finance goals and objectives as presented?
I motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Have some goals and objectives. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is discussion on the 23-24 budget timeline. Ms. Siegel, will you please take that away?
Yes, thank you and good evening to everyone. I just need a moment in order to bring a document onto the screen. So on the screen, I have the 23-24 budget timetable of the city. So I'm going to highlight a few key dates in the city's timetable. And then we will see how the internal district timeline integrates with the city's timetable. And the first item that I want to highlight is January 30th to March 24th. And that is the period when the mayor formulates the general fund budget. Also, April 4th is the date on which the mayor submits the proposed general fund budget to the city council. And May 9th is the date on which the city council submits the adopted general fund budget to the mayor. Now, before going on, I just want to take a step back. Between April 4th and May 9th, the city council does hold meetings with the public hearings, as well as individual meetings with the various departments, including the Board of Education. So the meeting with the Board of Education is usually scheduled in the middle of April. Then after May 9th, May 23rd is the last day for the mayor to veto the city council's adopted general fund budget. Of course, the mayor may accept the budget. And then May 30th is the last day for the city council to vote on the mayor's veto of the adopted general fund budget if the mayor does veto the budget. And so by June 1st, it is known the city budget is finalized and the amount of revenue is then final for the various departments, including the Board of Education. I just want to go back to the capital plan because the 5-year capital plan is announced prior to the process for the general fund or operating budget. And our facilities department is working with our technology department on the updates to the 5-year capital plan for 2023-24. And the date was set very early this year. It's actually January 20th. This city timetable was just released last week. And so they will submit that to the superintendent for review. We will have to submit it to the city so that we're on time, but then of course it will be submitted to the facilities committee and ultimately to the board. And if there are any changes specified by the board, I'm sure that the city will take that into consideration. We will be putting an increase in the budget into the 2023-24 Munis system when it opens, and that is on the timeline as January 27th. And we will discuss this evening the amount of funding that we are recommending the board approve to be requested from the city. So this is the city timeline, and we're presenting the operating budget request this evening because we'd like to have the board approval or initial board approval in the month of January, so that as the mayor is formulating the general fund budget between January 30th and March 24th, the superintendent can initiate conferences with the mayor and the mayor's team to advocate for appropriate funding in the city share for 23-24. Now, at this point, I'm going to bring up our internal timeline. Just take me a minute. Right. So now this document is our internal timeline, which is integrated with the city timetable. However, I prepare our timeline in October, well in advance of release of the official city timetable with the actual dates. And so our internal timeline refers to beginning development of the budget plan in October through December. It refers to consultations that the superintendent and I, as the CFO, have on the budget presentation. I always consider an initial budget gap plan, which is built into the budget request that we will see this evening. We also initiate the projections of registers in schools, meaning projected school enrollment for next year in December and January. The superintendent may confer at her discretion with various constituency groups. And then we're ready to present the initial budget request, as well as the food and nutrition services budget plan, to the finance committee. And so we are at this step this evening. And hopefully following this meeting, we'll be ready to present to the full board at the next board meeting. And the board may decide to approve the budget request at that time. In the past, they may have declined to approve pending the conduct of community forums. And that is why you will see in our internal timeline a date in March, early March, for approval of the budget request at a board meeting. So the reason for the time lapse is to allow the board, if it so chooses, time to conduct with the superintendent the various community forums before giving final approval to the budget request. But as we noted in the city timetable, the mayor begins the process on January 30th, and therefore it's critical that the consultations with the city through the mayor and his team begin as early as possible. Now, I noted that in early May, the city council submits the adopted budget to the mayor, and then the mayor may veto the budget, and then the city council may vote on the veto. By early June, the budget is final. And so in the May-June period, when it appears that city and state revenue are final or about to be finalized, I would always have an initial budget gap plan, but that plan is not final until the summer period ends, meaning August 31st passes, because we have to engage in the end of year close in the summer, and the end of year close yields critical information that impacts on the final budget for the new year and the gap plan. And that is why I always come back to the board in September to present the final budget gap plan. And that plan is based on updated fiscal projections and assumptions based on the latest available data, including the end of year close data for the prior year. So I've concluded the presentation of the timelines. Are there any questions?
Let's start with Mr. Macarone this time. Any questions or comments on the timeline?
No, sir.
Ms. Baptiste Perez?
Yes. When you say in September you come back to the board with the budget gap plan, that's the operations budget?
It's the gap plan, similar to the plan that I presented in this year. It was in October. we have a monetary request which represents a shortfall in the budget to support all of the operating needs. If we don't receive adequate revenue, we need to have a gap plan to cover that gap. And in the current year, as I have shared at prior meetings, we are covering a portion of that gap by withdrawing some of the savings on deposit in the internal savings fund, the savings that we deposited from surpluses that occurred in prior years due to the pandemic. In the current year, 2022-23, we are operating at a deficit, and our financial condition report, which is posted, indicates that the current projection is for a withdrawal of approximately $9 million from the internal service fund. So the gap plan pertains to the actions we're going to take, including withdrawal of funds from the internal service fund, as well as savings when positions aren't filled to close
Ms.
the gap.
Siegel,
Yes.
I always appreciate your really thorough answers, but can you keep it really simple for a non-finance person?
Sure.
Because July 1 is the start of the fiscal school year. So we're approving our operations budget for the fiscal school year before the start of the fiscal school year, before July 1, right? And then the gap plan is something separate from that.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. We're approving we're approving at this point in the year a budget request.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In Bridgeport, that budget request or monetary request represents funding that we need in order to finance basic operating costs.
Mm-hmm.
And the new fiscal year does start on July 1, but the prior fiscal year, while it comes to an end on June 30th, doesn't close financially until August 31st, when all of the invoices have been paid and a final reconciliation is done to determine the amount of debt. Or I should say generally, is that we may have a plan to cover a gap or a shortfall or deficit. All those words mean the same. And we have to close the prior fiscal year in order to know whether we can improve upon the actions to be taken to close the gap. So we may include in the gap certain cost reduction strategies. We may be able to modify those strategies. We may be able to increase the allocation of resources in certain areas, or we may have to decrease the allocation of resources in certain areas based on how the year closed in the prior year.
I have a follow-up question to that, Ms. Siegel, but if we're waiting till August 31st, July 1 for the 23-24 school year,
Mm-hmm.
there's expenses being run that we haven't approved. So doesn't that put a gap in our knowledge as to what's being spent? Because I understand that certain things are going to be consistent.
No, it's just a matter of, in our case, it's a matter of has the amount that we're going to withdraw from the ISF in order to balance the budget in 22-23 changed, right? So the current amount to be withdrawn is the current projection amount is $9 million. Now that may increase or decrease during the course of this year, and it can also change in the summer as we go through the end of year close. When we're planning for 23-24, there will be a balance in the internal service fund. So I'm going to be planning for a withdrawal of funds from the savings on deposit in order to close next year's budget without having to request that reductions be considered. We want to try and maintain services as we go into 23-24, which is also the last year of ESSER funding. Right? So we have a budget plan, and we'll be able to start spending in relation to that plan starting on July 1, the start of the new fiscal year. But the initial gap plan may have hypothetically $15 million being withdrawn from the ISF. Hopefully, when we complete the end of year close and complete the reconciliation of accounting for the prior year, 22-23, we may determine that we were able to withdraw less than anticipated from the ISF, thereby increasing the amount available and be in a stronger condition going into the following year. Right. So there won't be any issue with beginning the fiscal year and expending funds on our plan, but our plan will be technically over budget. We will be covering that overage or offsetting that overage or closing the gap through a combination of strategies, including a withdrawal from the ISF.
I don't have any further questions.
Ms. Brown, do you have anything?
Yeah, my question was more so to the, I don't know if this is probably not Ms. Siegel's question, but mainly the Finance Committee. I know that last year we did try to do a series of forums to keep people updated with the budget and how that was going to look and things like that. We had a lot of plans and things like that. My question is, because now that we know kind of where we should start planning for those forums, there was a lot of suggestions that was given from the community to help probably, you know, get more parents and families to these forums. I just want to know, is the Finance Committee thinking of a potential plan this year to outline some of those forums, whether it's location or topic, or break it down the information, like Ms. Baptiste-Perez said, to parents who are going to be sitting in those seats? I know we've done a good job, and Ms. Siegel always does a good job, but I know that every year we come to this particular moment and we want more people to be there, to come and to attend. And we know that so many things could be the reason why they're not coming through our doors. But as we're getting closer to the physical cliff in the next year or so, I think it's vital that we push even harder this year to really get parents, political leaders, like we've been saying, advocacy, those that are elected, you know, in those big positions, to really come and listen in to where Ms. Siegel is outlining that budget for us, once it is approved, obviously.
Right. I absolutely agree. And definitely we're going to have to definitely utilize all our technologies and get Parent Square, social media. I mean, we really got to be on it. We've tried to market it to different levels of success. We've had somewhere. Last time we had a full room was probably 4 or 5 years back. Mm-hmm. And when we have the full rooms, we receive pressure from the people we're supposed to be holding accountable. So what we need to do is, if we apply that pressure and get the people out, and we start informing them of what they need to do to pressure their elected officials, we as a board got to stand firm. We cannot back off on those community forums, because they've been canceled before because people were feeling personally attacked when it was pointed out that the reason these cuts are happening is because your city, local, and state officials are not giving us adequate funding. because we'll always end up the fall guys if we allow ourselves to be the fall guys. And I would like to thank Ms. Siegel for integrating the forums and some suggested dates in there, because that's quite helpful. So that saves us a step of having to try to plan around. And you hit the good pinch points where we need to be more advocate, more accessible. But that's something I guess we could put discuss strategies at the next meeting, or between all of us, or in the interim between us as well, because it's not really a big agenda item, but to inform the community together what we come up with would be great. You have anything else, Ms. Brown?
No, that's it for now. I lied. I know that there's going to be at some of the city council meetings, there's going to be opportunities for the Board of Ed to present testimonies. And I know that we talked about in our regular board meeting, you know, for those that need assistance with testimonies. So I hope that with this moment that may come up at the city council meetings when it comes to this budget item, that, you know, those that need assistance with the line items that we want to make sure we are addressing in our testimony, that we all sound the same and say the same thing, because that was another pressure point that we were facing last year and the year before last, is that there was 2 different messages concerning the budget. So I would hope that when we get to this point where we're coming before the mayor and we're coming before the city council, that whatever points, you know, Ms. Siegel is outlining as far as, you know, the major areas that we need to talk about, that everyone is on the same page when we testify or when we share our thoughts, from the city council all the way up to testifying to the governor, just because it sounds more together. And I would hope that the messaging will, you know, really resound across, you know, the Bridgeport area, because I noticed that, you know, if there's a larger issue, like, for example, we have something coming up for Bassick, I would love to see that same energy that we're putting towards the school building, towards the budget as well. And I'm hoping any of the community leaders and partners that are listening, you know, will take that same power and same initiative and, you know, utilize that to testify on our behalf. We'll be there, but like on our behalf as well, to support the budget that we need from the city council and also the state.
Absolutely. And speaking of the city council and dates on the city council, perhaps Ms. Brown, you could reach out. Last year during the board presentation of the budget, they did not allow any board members to speak, particularly at the very least the chair of the board or the chair of finance should be able to speak at that meeting. And if you could raise it up with the city council, with some of your peers on the city council, that we really should be allowed to speak, and it's really disrespectful to not hear from the board about the board member, the elected officials, their fellow elected officials at the meeting.
Got it. I will make contact and keep you guys updated. Thank
you. And now for my comments. The capital plan is really early this year, and it seems like the cart is putting the cart before the horse this year, no fault of our own. But I think we should probably strive for next year to get the capital plan done by, I guess, December, in case they put it even earlier in January. So
I think that is a prudent suggestion. Absolutely.
And last but not least, city council. Oh, also, Ms. Brown, is probably for you as well. Can we advise the city council when spring break is, so they don't schedule our community forum during spring break? So we don't have to go back and fix it, because everybody's going to be on vacation and nobody's going to be testifying.
I'm taking notes.
Thank you. I believe that's all I got. Does anybody have anything else, Ms. Siegel, anything we missed that we should have asked that we didn't?
With regard to the meeting with the city council, you're absolutely right. They should be requested not to schedule the community forum during spring break. But in the past 2 years, to the best of my recollection, they did schedule the meeting with the superintendent and board members during spring break.
Right. Yeah, we should try to avoid all of that, Ms. Brown, if you can. Just we testify before spring. We talk up to them before spring break, after spring break, because spring break is like when a lot of people take vacations and stuff like that. So it would be best to have it all around. And if we get to them early, they could set their schedule basically around that, because we're a very big portion of the budget, so we should be taken into account It's-
I'll send an email out, probably, if not this week, next week, to get on, get some meeting or potential opportunity for us to share that way. To see, what their plans is as well.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's all I got. I think we're ready for the next agenda item, if there's
Oh,
nothing.
can I add
Yes.
something to
go ahead,
that?
Ms. Perkins.
Maybe in addition to a timeline like this, a timeline as to advocacy at the state level. I felt that last year on the committee, we were finding out the day before that there's testimony. And so it was very last minute. So I really like having the timeline. And this is just a general comment about a previous superintendent, not Mr. Chestani, but helping coordinate with the district so we can actually get people up to Hartford, since now they're having testimony in person again.
Mm-hmm.
If we can start planning that now and see if we'll get individuals interested or other groups that are already going, so we can do it as a collective. I think that would also be pretty powerful. It's not only just there's different ways of showing up, and I think that's what Board Member Lombard had brought up. So,
And absolutely, go ahead, Ms. Siegel.
I would just like to add that the state budget by law, I believe, has to be approved by the legislature by May 1st or a date in that range. There was a year in which they did not approve a budget by May 1st, but generally that's the target date. So today's January 11th. I would say we're looking at February, March, and April as the months for advocacy at the state level, with February and March being critical months in order to communicate the priority of funding for Bridgeport at the state level at an early point, so that it can be considered by the state legislature.
Absolutely. Do you remember what time of year the public testimony is, where they have the hours long wait on? So that was that this?
That had to be like April or May, or maybe
Right.
I know it was like.
Yeah, because they haven't even put it out. I mean, we've been on the lookout as soon as they post it. We need to get on it, and maybe we could get a bus or something up there. I mean, but last time I was on a bus, I was on it with like 5 people.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
other organizations.
Right.
I was gonna say that in the past, I remember when I was a little bit younger, like we definitely had buses come up from Bridgeport, and some of those buses were had community leaders, churches. Like it was definitely like packed back then. I think we should definitely leverage that again, because some of them, some of the churches and the community leaders are actually teachers and parents in the Bridgeport public school system. And I think that could benefit them as well, and definitely make, there's power in numbers. So I'm hoping that everyone, that COVID doesn't affect us this year to be able to go up to Hartford to be able to testify, because I definitely think that in-person feel is what they need, and that's the type of pressure that they need up there. Same thing for City Council and any other place that we're going to be sharing this information. But I definitely think if we should start, getting with Ms. Perrin and really seeking to see how we can start planning ahead, because we know it's coming up. Ms. Siegel has given us, once we get the dates, we need to start booking buses and really hitting the grounds with trying to get people on those buses to be up there and to testify. And, shout out to, those that stayed on the call that night. We were up, 2:00 in the morning, testifying. And I think that says that that's true testament to the mission and the vision of what we're trying to do. But I'm hoping, we don't have to be up there all night, but I'm hoping that we can at least get parents and students to really testify to why they believe that the budget should be increased, and that, they feel important when they do that. So.
Absolutely. Okay. Mr. Macaron, do you have anything else before we move on to the next agenda item?
No, sir.
Okay,
I'm
thank
fine.
you. All right, now, next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on the 2023-2024 operating budget request. Ms. Siegel, take it away.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to now present the PowerPoint on the budget request, which is the operating budget request for 23-24. And this document is divided into 4 parts. The first part is the fiscal framework, goals and challenges. The second part is a brief overview of the current year, 22-23. Part 3 is the budget request. And part 4 is for reference. It's an appendix on grant-funded services. So first, the fiscal framework, goals and challenges. And we're going to briefly describe the fiscal goals, district enrollment, the NCEP, net current expenditures per pupil, the school allocation model, and some challenges. So these are my goals, and therefore they are the goals of the finance department and the goals of the district. Structurally balanced budget, school-based budgeting model, fiscal accountability, and comprehensive fiscal management. Now, in terms of district enrollment, you can see on this chart that over the last 5 years, the district has lost 1,654 students. Let's remember that the pandemic year was 1920. So the pandemic started in March of 2020. So it was in this year. And you can see that the enrollment in the following year was down by 800 students. And in the subsequent year, another 281 students. We did gain 84 students in 22-23. And the trend seems to be upward, but not substantially. So for next year, I'm just projecting a minor increase. Now, it's critical to understand, particularly in your advocacy efforts, that our special ed population and our L population, English language learner population, have grown significantly. And the growth in the L population has outpaced special education. And so on October 1 of 2022, our special ed number was 3608, or 18.86% of the population, up 135 over the prior year at the same time. And the L number was 5,028, up by 618. And that the L students are 26.28% of the budget. And the L population continues to grow. And so we have added ESL teachers, primarily funded in the ESSER grants, because the needs have arisen out of the pandemic. We've also added, at the request of our Director of Bilingual and ESL Education, Anna Sousa Martins, we've added several bilingual program assistant positions, which is a paraprofessional position. Anna has also added hourly tutors to assist at other schools. So this is critical information, because while the population has declined by what some may regard as a significant number, 1,654 students over 5 years, we still have to maintain our classes. We have not been able to reduce the number of classes due to the caps on class size and school organization. And we have growing populations of students with special needs who need more intensive services. Now, our NCEP, net current expenditures per pupil, as of the last report, which is January 22, so that's a year ago, we were at 16,954. You can see that we've overtaken Waterbury slightly, we used to be behind all of the other districts on the chart. These are our peer districts. But Hartford, once again, is the highest at 21,756. And of 166 districts, we rank 145. So we're not at the bottom, thankfully, but we're in the lowest quartile. And so we're underfunded by approximately $19 million for each $1,000 in NCEP we don't receive. And we always like to compare that with Hartford. So if we were equitably funded with Hartford, our budget would rise by almost $95 million. Now, I just want to point out that NCEP is a statistic that's calculated by the state. There is a formula, and it includes all fund sources. So it's going to include all grants received by a district, inclusive of those grants that are targeted to specific schools. So even though a school-specific grant is helping one particular school, it's being counted in the grand total and is used to calculate the per capita or NCEP. Now I just want to go back for a second. Now we have been also sharing with the board each year the comparison with the peer districts. I want to see if my link is working. Should be.
While you're doing that, let the record reflect, Mr. Albert Benahan has joined the meeting in person.
Thank you, Mr. Sagabe. I was in online for 6:53.
I did.
Let you know. Thank you.
Okay, so I did check that link last night, but apparently there's an issue with it. But I did put in your packets a copy of the comparison chart with the peer districts, and if time permits later, and if you wish, we can put it on the screen. Now, this is a chart illustrating how the special ed excess cost grant works. So basically, when we have an out-of-district placement, we have to pay 4.5 times the NCEP for each placement, and then we have to pay the percentage cap of the balance of the cost. And the cap is going to vary annually. And you can see over here in this chart that the cap was rising over a period of 5 years, and it was rising significantly. It was 22.37, and it rose all the way to 29.11% in that first pandemic year, 1920. Then in 2021, it drops to 16.52. So that was very helpful. And then last year, it increased slightly to 18.02, but that is still much lower than even the lowest number of the prior years. So we were pleased to have that occurrence. You can see in the bottom box how the calculation works. So if we have an out-of-district placement and it has a cost of $100,000, we would have to pay 4.5 times the NCEP. That's $76,293 plus 18.02% of the difference between $100,000 and the $76,293. And 18.02% times 23,707 is $4,272. So then we add 4,272 to 76,293, and our share becomes 80,565. The state then pays the district in the excess cost grant 19,435. Now the number of out-of-district placements currently in January does appear to be lower than last year, but we're at the mid-year point, so I'm very cautious about declines at this point in the year, because a decline can reverse. And if that happens, then the cost factor for out-of-district placements will increase again. However, there have been increases for occupational therapists, for speech teachers, for one-to-one paras. So while there might be a decline in one area of special education, there are concomitant increases in other areas. And we can see on this slide that in the 21-22 education finance system, special ed was 26.4% of the total budget, 30.12% of the operating budget alone. Now, special ed is funded by certain grants to some extent. So, for example, the IDEA grant that we received from the federal government through the state, of course, but it's federally funded. The IDEA grant is one of the few grants that is intended for mandated services, specifically mandated special ed services. So the IDEA grant is going to be reflected in the $95.9 million figure. And we also fund certain positions in the State Alliance grant and in other grants. We have special ed paras funded in Title I as another example. Now, sometimes I'm asked, well, looking at the amount that we spend for special ed, how much did we spend on out of district? What did we spend in district? Well, we just looked at the other screen where we examined the excess cost grant. So the number that's reported in EFS, that is net of the excess cost grant. So of that 95.9 million, approximately 75 million is in district, approximately 20.8 million out of district, and that's net of the excess cost grant. Right? Now, the school allocation model consists of a position allocation and operating allocation. We also have the teacher's choice allocation that goes to teachers for a school specialty e-card, and we have the parent involvement allocation. Now, the operating allocation, we have increased by $5 with ESSER funds. The teacher's choice allocation, we have increased from $30 per teacher to $150 per teacher in the current year with ESSER funds. And in both cases, operating allocation and teacher's choice allocation, for next year, we do have stability in the final year of ESSER incorporated into the budget plan. And the parent involvement allocation is dependent upon the Title I formula. We take the Title I appropriation, calculate 1% of that appropriation, I divide that by the projected elementary school register in order to calculate the per capita, and then I apply that per capita with parity to the high schools through the state priority grant. So Title I applies to elementary schools, state priority grant to the high schools. Okay. And this chart is illustrating the various challenges that we have. I like to call these circles pressure points or variables that impact the availability of resources. So we have to track carefully utility costs, absence coverage or benefits, personnel benefits, transportation, legal services, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, the special education and L services that our children need. And we have taken steps to try to control the growth in these areas to the greatest extent possible, but there are limitations. Now, here are some examples of what we have done in order to build in some cost controls to optimize resources, but even with our best efforts, we are still encountering significant growth in cost factors. So there are escalated costs that we must confront. And the first item is the transportation contract. We negotiated, and I think you're aware of my reputation for being a very strong negotiator, we negotiated the best possible 5-year contract. And in light of the inflationary pressures, the rates per year that you see on the screen were the best rates that we could achieve. And so in the current year, there's a 6.72% increase. Next year, 4.25, followed by 3.25, 4, and then 3.75. Those are significant increases. And this chart compares the expenditures for transportation, the actual in 21-22 to 22-23 in terms of our projections. Right, and our number for the current year, of course, will be higher because of the the contract and the continuation, of course, of full services. We include this slide on the curriculum renewal cycle because our primary focus as a school district, of course, is on the academic achievement of children and the delivery of various educational services. And so a critical focus is always on instruction and curriculum. And we always try to show the cost factors involved in renewing a curriculum program. And it's important for the city and state officials to understand the cost factors involved so that there's an appreciation of the need for adequate annual funding. And now we move on to a brief overview of the 22-23 budget. And I'll go over the district budget, the trends and implications of the enrollment, our SPED and L services in terms of federal and state funding, the state and city share, and the average percentage growth. So the pie graph is showing the distribution of funding. Our current year budget is $262 million with the city share and the state share, meaning state ECS. And the city share did increase by $2 million in the current year. The state increase was $15,434. In the bottom section, we have the federal grants and the state grants that are part of our comprehensive plan, meaning we could not operate without them because they are providing services which in some cases may be considered supplemental by others, but in our strategic plan are critical. And we did lose money in Title IIA, $48,744. The priority grant, which is a state grant, continues to decline, and the magnet grant continues to decline. Now, I just want to take a moment to emphasize that I have been working closely with the superintendent on those areas where the district has been losing money, but has an opportunity to reverse that trend. And this loss of funding for the magnet grant, state magnet grant, is derived from the loss of enrollment at the Fairchild Wheeler High School campus. And with the loss of magnet tuition for the suburban students, the total loss of funding at the Fairchild campus for this year is close to $300,000. We are covering a shortfall in our operating budget to keep that campus operating. And so I know the superintendent and the deputy superintendent are working closely with the 3 high school principals on plans to revitalize the campus and hopefully increase enrollment, both suburban enrollment and district enrollment. But they have to achieve 25% suburban enrollment minimum. They also have to achieve a 25% in the racial isolation standard as well. The other area where we are subsidizing and losing money is with our pre-K classes, because the state does not fund pre-K fully. And we are subsidizing pre-K approximately $1.8 to $2 million this year. Not all the seats are filled. There are efforts underway, vigorous efforts underway under the superintendent's leadership to try to fill the remaining seats. But I just think it's important as we look ahead to 24-25, the year when the fiscal cliff will arrive, that we look ahead and take time now to address these areas with very strong targeted plans. All right, now the city budget is, the city share is 27.9% of the budget. The state share is 72.1%. I mentioned the enrollment trends, and I highlighted that over 5 years, the district has lost 1,654 students. We also spoke about the SPED population, the L population. So we also looked at the change over 5 years. So for special education on 10/1/22, 3,608, in 2017, 3,286. The L population is 5,028 compared to 3,420. So we've had significant growth year to year, and certainly over the 5-year period. So what does this show us? Well, obviously, overall enrollment has declined. Special ed and L enrollment have increased. So our special needs populations are growing. They require more intensive services with lower student to staff ratios, and those ratios have a higher cost factor. We have had lower additions to the Alliance grant each year. We're also experiencing reductions in the state priority grant. We've actually lost $2 million in the state priority grant over an 8-year period. And there's always the possibility that Title I and other grants with formulas linked to enrollment could decline either next year or in a subsequent year. Now, this chart is, again, focused on SPED and English language learners. And it's illustrating the grants that are targeted to those areas. And in fact, for the current year, there was a slight increase in the on the special ed side in IDEA, 1.88%. There's also a small pre-K grant, which we use to fund services at Skane. But you can see what 1.8% means. It's $100,000, just barely enough to cover the escalated costs of salary and health insurance and other benefits. And on the bilingual side, the state bilingual grant did go up by a number that I would regard as significant, 261,606. And Title III, which is the federal side of the bilingual grant, went up by 51,742 for a total of 313, which I did report to the board when I presented the final gap plan for this year. So this was a welcome improvement in those grants, considering the growth in the number of students. And I did move some teachers out of ESSER into those grants with funded by the increased grant amount. However, I still have a number of L teachers in the ESSER grant because while 313 is a substantial, 13,000 is a substantial number, it's not enough. And the growth appears to be continuing. All right. Now, this is a very critical slide as you continue your advocacy efforts, because we have had average growth in our operating budget, meaning the state and city share, of 1.12% per year over the last 8 years. That is clearly minimal and insignificant to keep pace with escalating costs. Right? And we take every possible measure to control costs and manage our costs so that we can optimize the use of our limited resources. So 1.12% is inadequate. And you can see over the last 8 years, we actually had a year where we lost funding. We were down by 0.45%. The best year was 15-16 with 2.45%. Right? But most districts would be looking for, I would say, anywhere from 2.5% to 4.5% per year in order to maintain stability and possibly add programs. We are constantly in a shortfall. And this slide is emphasizing that with full disclosure that, yes, we did receive $144.9 million in ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER, but that's a one-time infusion of federal resources, which will end on September 30th of 24. And we listed the various types of services that we are funding. And once that funding ends, unless there are other fund sources, we will not be able to continue to support 10 additional counselors, 11 social workers. We won't be able to fund the additional L teachers in ESSER. Now, as I mentioned, that's a mandated service. And I also have 8 special ed resource teachers funded in the ESSER grant. We also have 4 ASD classes that were new, opened last year and continuing this year, funded in the IDEA ESSER grant. So there are high numbers of positions for mandated services that may have arisen from the pandemic, but may not end when ESSER ends. Those services may need to be continued. And we will have to find funding to continue those services. That will be the first priority. So now we're going to move on to part 3, the operating budget request. And here again is the pie chart. Now the total need is 26.5 million. Now I want to emphasize, hopefully this is a worst case scenario. So it's always better to reduce the number at a later point than to have to increase. So hopefully this is a worst case scenario. Now, of that 26.5 million, which I'm going to explain how that's calculated, but the city portion, I've calculated for the board's consideration, 12.4 million, and that's 4.3% of the amount. And I'm projecting that at the state level, we're going to receive at least 1.5 million, because hopefully the state will resume the annual increases in Alliance ECS funding. As we've stated, in the current year, it was $15,434. In prior years, in some of the years, it was $4 million. In the most recent years, it was 1.5 to 2 million. And even that is not enough. And it's not comparable to the amounts received by other districts, such as Hartford or Waterbury. But I included here as an initial starting point, 1.5 million, and then 12.6 in the GAP plan. And at this point in the year, without knowing the direction in grant funding, we assume stability in those grants. Now, this chart is illustrating the major components of the 26.5 million. And before I go over the top section, I just want to jump down to the bottom for a minute, because I want to emphasize another factor that we are confronting. we have been confronting a labor shortage. There continues to be a number of teacher vacancies as well as paraprofessional vacancies. The labor shortage appears to be abating somewhat, but not substantially. And over the last few months, most of our, or I would say almost all of our new hires for teachers are experienced teachers. They're either coming to us from other districts, or perhaps they've been out of the workforce and have decided to return, or they are returning from another state. And they are coming in at high steps because they are experienced. Therefore, our average teacher salary is increasing. And that means that we're not going to achieve the turnover savings that we were able to achieve in prior years. So we're glad that we're able to fill the positions, and we're filling them with experienced teachers when we are able to fill them. But there is a negative fiscal impact that we also have to confront. And therefore, in this bottom section, I've included as the credits only $1 million, which may or may not be achieved, rather than 1.5. Now, coming up to the top, we have the collective bargaining growth. Let's remember that the teachers will have step movement. The administrators will have step movement, and there will be increases for the other unions. And so projecting approximately 5.3 million, that it would include Medicare and MRF. MRF is the payment for the payment to the pension plan for the non-certified staff. Health insurance, we don't have a projection yet from the consulting firm, Siegel Consulting Firm. That's SEGAL, has no relationship to me at all. But Siegel Consulting is the firm that is used by the city for the projections. Those projections should be released in the coming weeks. So I've used a 6% projection. We're also waiting for confirmation that MRF will again increase. We were told, I believe 2 years ago, to expect increases as the percentage moves up. I believe it's going to go to 24 or 25 ultimately, but hopefully the increase next year is no higher than 1%. The transportation contract I mentioned earlier, so 4.25% for next year. And the utilities, we do have a workbook that explains the projections for the utilities that we were ready to present, at a November finance meeting. I believe we'll present that now in February. I know George Garcia is on the call. He's going to speak to the permit policy later on in the meeting. But George is working on various cost reduction strategies, including solar panels and the various arrangements with United Illuminating to for energy efficient lighting, as an example, to reduce electricity costs. Nevertheless, there will still be a growth factor that we have to build in to the budget plan. I always build in an increase in special education. I have never experienced, in the years I've been in the district, a decline. So I'm always building in a growth factor. Hopefully, special ed at some point will stabilize. And that's why I repeat, hopefully the number that I've calculated is a worst case scenario, and we'll be able to reduce it before the school year begins. Now, I mentioned in prior meetings, and I've mentioned earlier this evening, that in the current year, 22-23, we have built in a projection in our operating budget to withdraw $9 million from the internal service fund in order to balance the 22-23 budget. So that is the current projection. That number could increase. It could go to 9.5 or 10 million or higher. We're taking every possible fiscal management step to leverage our resources and try to keep the 9 million as the maximum and hopefully reduce that number. But the point here is that whatever the number is, and let's assume for the moment it's 9 million, if I have to withdraw 9 million from the savings on deposit in order to balance, then going into the next year, I need $9 million in order to begin at the same level. And so we have to build $9 million into our budget request. And then there is the vacancy fill factor. So you've heard me speak many times about the vacancies. No one wants there to be vacancies. We certainly want to fill our positions with certified teachers and qualified paraprofessionals. The reality is that there's a labor shortage. And so there's a convergence of two critical factors. One factor is the shortage of qualified staff, and the other factor is the savings that are derived when we cover a vacancy with a substitute. And so those factors converge, creating a positive fiscal impact. The educational impact has to be assessed. And so when I build the budget, I build it on the basis of all positions being filled. Well, if all positions are going to be filled, then we need $4 million to cover the cost, the cost difference between the cost of filling the position and the cost of substitute staff. And then, oh, sorry, my hand slipped. I apologize. I'm back. Sorry about that. So, and then I always build in a small reserve. And the total then is 26.5 million, which is an increase of 10.1%. Now, I've been asked in the past to break down the collective bargaining amount by union. So clearly it should not be surprising that the number for the teachers will be the highest, 4.3 million. And the next highest would be for our administrators. Now, I took 12.4 million. Let's just go back and examine that. I believe I highlighted in teal the items contributing to the 12.4 million. So the collective bargaining, the health insurance, MRF, transportation, and utilities. So that should equal the 12.4 million. So that's 4.7% of the total and 16.99%, about 17% of the prior city share. Right? And if the city were to fund 12.4 million, and that's 4.7% of the total budget, that would equate to average growth in the city share of only 1.06% per year over 9 years. So I want to reemphasize at this point that in each year in which the district does not receive adequate operating revenue results in a compounded need in the subsequent year. And we are now experiencing the impact of over 8 years of inadequate funding. So how are we going to close the gap? Keeping in mind, as I said, that hopefully, and there aren't any guarantees, but hopefully 26.5 million is a worst case scenario, and we may be able to reduce it at a point in the future. I should add, it could also increase, because at this point in the year, this is a projection. So if the city were to allocate 12.4 million, which we know is probably unrealistic, but let's hypothetically assume that they could allocate 12.4 and the state were to allocate 1.5, then we could theoretically withdraw 7.1 million from the ISF. Now, I indicated here that the 2021 amount after the 9 million would leave a balance of about 9.6 million. We still have our 21-22 reserve on file, on deposit. And then I included about $1 million in ARP ESSER in the last year that we would apply to eligible services. Now I want to emphasize, because I've also stressed in prior meetings, that when we speak about the operating budget, we're speaking about basic operating needs, speaking about principals, secretaries, security guards, clericals, maintenance facilities, custodians, maintenance of buildings, nurses, all of the basic operating, and the teachers, of course. So basic operating services. I cannot fund the cost of a principal in ESSER. I can't fund the cost of the second grade teacher that we would have to provide under ordinary conditions in ESSER. Right? So when I speak about using the ESSER funds to apply to eligible services in compliance with guidelines, I'm referring to technology or curriculum renewal or facilities projects and other types of services that can be considered as supplemental according to the guidelines of the grant. And I'm not referring to the basic or core operational requirements to manage a school district. And then I put in $1 million in our Title I budget, assuming that Title I stays stable. I think we'll be able to do that. But if Title I declines, then this item could become problematic. And then if we have vacancies again, we will have savings, which I'm projecting at $3.5 million. Right now, the 12.4 million is likely unrealistic, and so if this number remains, then we would be withdrawing additional funding from the ISF. And the GAP plan also includes what I would call GAP resolution strategies, most of which I've already mentioned. And we always include this slide to illustrate that while the number of our full-time employees in the district office has increased, and increased, I might add, due to the additional funding, it's still most likely lower than in other districts, our peer districts. This is the bar graph showing the operating budget divided by the categories in the Munis system, the 5 categories. And of course, well over 70%, I think it's about 75% is devoted, of course, to instruction and student support. Now, the administrative support is 23.2%, and that's on the next slide. What does that mean? Well, that's business, facilities, HR, payroll, pupil services, security, transportation, and then tech and student data management. And it is facilities and transportation that are the largest contributors in this area. And then it's also important to understand that, as this slide illustrates, that we're spending in the operating budget well over $65 million on benefits. Now, benefits include the health insurance for retirees, our premium cost share, the employer share, life insurance, Medicare, MRF, Social Security, unemployment, workers' comp, and the administrative fees. And so this is a summary showing the calculation of the essential need, the requested city share, state share minimum, and the total population, the SPED&L population, the average growth per year of 1.12%, and the NCEP. And then part 4 is the appendix, which you can read at your leisure. So I'll stop at this point and ask if there are any questions. I do want to just note that after we conclude the question and answer period, I will present the Food and Nutrition Services budget plan, which is part of our overall budget request.
Baptiste Perez. Would you like to begin this?
Start with the last questions I had first. Just on the chart where you mentioned that we're looking at stability, trying to go to the actual.
Yeah. Do you have the page number?
Yes.
The page number is up here at the top.
Page 22, the operating budget, when stability is projected, is it still with the decrease in $48,000 for federal grants, the decrease in state grants, or so we're not looking to try and, I guess, stability is we had a loss for the previous school year to 22-23, but this year we're projecting that it'll be stable, flat, no change.
For the purpose of the budget projection,
Yes.
I project that the numbers will stay the same. I won't know the actual appropriations until the summer or early September when the state releases the information. As part of the budget process, you can certainly advocate at the state level for the priority grant remaining stable or increasing. The state legislature, when they consider the education budget, they consider ECS, Alliance ECS, and they also consider the funding for all of the various state grants.
Okay. I have another question. What was our city request last year? I feel like last year we requested, I don't even recall the amount.
Yeah, it was in the range of about 8 million. I think it was 8.5.
We requested 8.5. I feel like that was actually an increase.
Yeah,
Now
I'm recalling about 8.5. I did 12.4 because I included the transportation and the utilities. Now I thought that was fair and reasonable. I know 12.4 is probably unrealistic, but I think it's fair to include it, particularly because a few years ago, before the pandemic and before ESSER funding, when the district had to make reductions in the budget, the board was ready to make a reduction in the guidelines for transportation. And the mayor then decided that he would allocate additional funding in order to ensure the continuation of the bus transportation. But he didn't allocate the full amount. So there was some additional funding added to the budget. So the city and the board are partners in terms of of providing a strong and sound educational system. And I think it's reasonable to include the transportation cost.
I actually recall that, Ms. Siegel. I believe that's when the district was looking to reduce the mileage to qualify for the bus.
Yes, that is correct.
And I recall I was still a law student at that time, but I recall reading that in the newspaper. And I think that's actually an extremely valid point that you brought up with that example, because as we're looking to relocate a high school from one side of town to the other, and it was a selection by the city, we should have the city cover our transportation costs, because that's going to cause a significant increase of students needing transportation needs.
Right.
Do you know of another situation where it's worked, where we've gotten additional funds from the city or the mayor?
I don't recall any other situation, but in the case of the transportation, I know the parents were outraged, at the prospect of no longer having bus transportation.
Just a quick point of information on that. Sorry to interrupt, but that influx was temporary, 1 year influx that was not added to the MVR, so it went away as soon as the pressure was off the city. Correct, Ms. Siegel?
I believe they added it, but it wasn't the full amount.
There's another like 500 or something added the
Right,
second year.
exactly. So we were short, I believe $500,000. And then in the following year, we requested that amount and they did not allocate it.
Sorry.
That's all the questions I have for now.
Mr. Macaron?
I'm with you guys. I'm good.
Mr. Benahan?
No, no questions at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Brown?
I do have a question. I know that we were talking, Ms. Siegel, about we were talking about the fact that the students are the enrollment for Fairchild Wheeler has decreased. I am wondering. I know you said you were working with the superintendent to identify a plan. I'm wondering, is that decrease just only at that particular area that has the largest decrease, or that's across the board for all of our schools?
Well, the interdistrict magnet schools, the 3 high schools at the Fairchild campus and Discovery Magnet, receive a state interdistrict magnet grant.
Mm-hmm.
Now the grant has funding for in-district students, meaning Bridgeport students, and funding for suburban students. And the amount for the suburban students is over $7,000, and the amount for in-district students is over $3,000. Now, the amount in the grant has never been sufficient to operate the entire school. Has always been supplemented by our operating budget. However, over the last few years, in those grants, I've kept the same number of positions with the turnover in positions and the escalated costs. Currently, those grants are projected to be over budget by $1.7 million.
Mm-hmm.
And we are funding that $1.7 million in our operating budget. Now, in the current year, the 3 schools at the high school level, not Discovery. Discovery has been able to maintain their population very well. The 3 high schools in the current year, once again, lost population. And when the number of suburban students declines, we also lose the magnet tuition of $3,000 per student that we charge. So the total amount of revenue loss for this year is about $300,000. So if we hadn't had that loss, then the deficit in the grant would be about 1.4 million, not 1.7.
So I guess my other question would be, was COVID the impact on that, or enrollment was already decreasing? Because now I'm wondering, and I know that Ms. Clark also talked about different grants that we had applied for to help out in certain areas. And I'm not sure that is one of the areas that you were talking about that's grant funded through our office, any additional grants. But I'm wondering, is that impact due to COVID? Because I remember we were in the legislative breakfast that we recently had, and Mr. Sokolovic had brought up a huge point about the number of students, the number of students that we have lost, but also too, all of the needed, especially with SEL, has risen in the middle of that. So I'm like, what can we do to really help support the superintendent in that particular process? Because if we need funding for that school to maintain, we definitely need enrollment to increase as well.
Well, they need to increase their enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
Through what I would describe as, revitalization of the schools. So I know the superintendent, the deputy superintendent are working closely with the three principals. I'm not, clearly I'm not involved in that process, but I know they are working closely with the three principals to create a strategic plan that and we have included some funding for those schools in a new supplemental grant that we have.
Okay.
And in order to support that process. Right.
Okay, that's all I have. I had one about BASIC, but I guess I think Ms. Baptiste Perez had already addressed it, so it's okay.
Okay, I'm gonna start where Ms. Brown left off with Fairchild Wheeler and their enrollment. The enrollment has been down since we started charging tuition, and the surrounding districts did not allow us to recruit on their campuses anymore as much as they used to. It started going down then. There's a big court case trying to get them to even pay their tuition. Now, we need to have this really disturbs me. My full disclosure, my son goes to Fairchild Wheeler IT, and as a parent, that's where I want him, because it's one of our stellar schools. But as a board member and advocate for overall the school districts, it disturbs me, this 75-25 split, because we can't have a full building with Bridgeport students and suburban students at the same time, without suburban students and without the racial balance. So what that's saying to me is we need to attract more Caucasian people from the wealthiest suburbs in order to get additional funding. And that disturbs me on a visceral level. But it is what it is. We got to recruit from the suburbs, and we just need to definitely expand our suburban presence. Hopefully that plan. There's actually a recruitment drive tomorrow. Is an open house at Fairchild Wheeler, along with the science fair to showcase the school, which I'll be attending for my son's science project. But yeah, just on that point, I'm not going to belabor that point too much. I got other questions. Now, you say last year, Ms. Siegel, we got a combined influx of dollars of $2,015,000 between the state and city, correct?
Yes.
And this year's projected increases in staff salaries are $5,300,000.
Yes. 5.3 million.
Right. So we actually have a shortfall in just staff salaries. We couldn't even cover that with the increase we received from the state and local contributions.
Correct.
What else have please? Okay. Now you were present at the where we met with the state legislators, and there's a number that keeps being put out there by the state legislator to rationalize our lack of increased funding and disproportionate amount of funding that we receive, stating that we lost 3,000 students over time. I don't see a number 3,000 decrease anywhere in our timeline. Where is the state getting this information from, where we lost 3,000 students?
Well, that number would not be correct for the time frame that I've cited in this presentation. All right, so I cited a, let's go back to the beginning, put it on the screen. So over 5 years, from 17-18 to current year, as of October 1 in each year, we've lost 1,654 students.
Yeah, and that's a number that's been used as a rationale for all.
Now, there was a loss over here from 16-17, 17-18 of 264. So if we add the 260, we counted the 264. Let's see, 2, 6, 7, 15. Yeah, so I counted these numbers. So I'm counting the loss of 264 in my number.
Yeah, because it's really disconcerting to hear our state legislators operate with a 3,000 student deficit. And we are the largest school district. We're currently the largest, again, correct, Ms. Siegel? Largest district?
I believe so. You know, I think it fluctuates between Hartford and Bridgeport, or Hartford and or Bridgeport and New Haven from year to year. So if we're not number one, we're number two.
Right. That being said, any source of new funding that doesn't show Bridgeport on the top of the heap and receiving those funds is disproportionate on its face.
Yes.
So our legislators need to, if there's a formula that somehow puts Bridgeport number 10 or 15 in line for funding, there's something wrong with the formula that needs to be fixed. Because there's no way. And I was just looking at Westport today. Westport's struggling with a 5.33% increase, trying to find out what they cut. They're losing their minds with a 5.3% increase. I would kill for a 5.3% increase. Not really, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but I mean, it seems like every year it's the same thing, and it's really, really scary because we're approaching that cliff closer and closer. And we got to get factual information into our legislators' hands in order to properly advocate. I mean, because if they're going hand in hand saying we lost 3,000 students and accepting any answer they get based upon that information is problematic.
Mrs. Sokolovic, can I also add something?
Sure.
With hearing that information, I remember talking to Ms. Perrin and asking Ms. Perrin and to Ms. Siegel to provide this presentation to those legislators, because that was repeated multiple times. And part of it was saying that we can't, in so many words, we can't give money if the numbers are down. That if I'm correct, is that what we heard, Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, and it's problematic in another way because we're not the only district that's down.
Right. So to hear it, and then our enrollment being down as one of the reasons why we don't receive certain funding or come from certain funding sources is a little alarming to me, because I'm like, obviously the pandemic has something to do with it, but also too, Bridgeport's been needing funding from day one. So that nothing in that area has really changed that I can remember. So I really hope, Ms. Siegel, that we can pass information that you have spent countless hours on trying to prepare for us all to be at the same, our drums to beat at the same beat, because it's really disheartening to hear it in the room, but just
Right.
imagining what is that message being displayed at the Capitol, and also here, in Hartford, and then also at the city council level as well, because it seems like we're all saying something totally different, but we're hearing it from our CFO that this is what it is. So I'm like, why isn't our word being taken as, gold? Because you are doing the numbers, you are here within the district. So I'm interested to see what,
Right.
to Mr. Sokolovich's point, the fact that where's this number coming from?
Right.
There is a different formula or something.
Right. So just a couple quick points. Number one, I did also prepare for you the talking points,
Thank you.
which is a Word document. Number two, the talking points include the current register, of over 19,000 students. Number three, while the number of students has declined by 1,654 over a 5-year period, we have 38 sites at which education takes place. The 38 sites include aquaculture and the Bridgeport Learning Center. But that's the number that I work with, 38 sites. And even a decline of 1,000 students doesn't necessarily mean a decline in classes, because that number is distributed across 38 sites and multiple grades. And when a loss occurs in a classroom, if a classroom at the elementary level starts with, let's say, 28 students and now has 25 students, we still have to maintain that class. And so that's an important point for everyone to understand. And then also, as I've continued to emphasize, the special education and English language learner needs are significant and growing. And the children need more intensive services, which have a higher cost factor. Now, they may say to you, but we allocated additional money in the state bilingual grant. We allocated additional money in the in the Title III grant through the federal government. That is true, and we are appreciative of those resources, but it's not enough considering the growth in the numbers. There's over 5,000 students, 5,200 L students. So I think those are all, and the other critical point, all of these points are in the talking points, is that the average growth over the last 8 years is 1.12%. There isn't any rational person who would not agree that that is insufficient for a school district to operate effectively.
Absolutely agree. I got one final question. How many out of school district placements do we have currently, Ms. Siegel?
Out of district, I would have to check the exact number. Let's see, it's I think it's around 300. Let me just check for you, one moment. But that number will fluctuate.
Right.
So whatever, I'm going to check for it, but the number that I share with you is a point in time, and it will change. All right, I will have that in a moment. So as of December 23rd, the report I received had 312.
Yeah, that's 12.
And as I said, that is lower than the prior year. However, it's a point in time. That number could increase. And also in terms of the cost factor, we have to consider the cost of each placement. The number of children can decline, but the cost of the individual placements could increase. And let's also remember that with the ESSER funding over the 3-year period, we have, through the efforts of the prior superintendent, effective school solutions working in several schools with a therapeutic service model to try to provide services to children in district, in the school, as an alternative to an out-of-district placement. So it is possible that that program, is that the program is succeeding and the success is reflected in the number. I do not know. I have not seen an official evaluation report for the program.
Right. Yeah, I asked for that number because I just wanted to do a quick calculation of the average per student for for the very necessary services that we cannot provide and we have to send them to out of district for is $66,794 per out of district placement on average, which is more than three times our net expenditures per pupil.
Right.
That's a lot. So that's why I hope we can develop a better plan to bring these students in the district. And there's been talk before about creating a district plan.
Yes, and I know there are efforts to keep children in district, and in some cases, when I receive a request for a one-to-one para and I ask questions, I'm told that this is an effort to keep the child in the district. So certainly that's one strategy. I wanted to put on the screen, if I may, this chart, which is included in your packet, and it's a comparison of the state city share for the 5 peer districts. And I wanted to call your attention to the change in the Alliance grant in this column. So here's Bridgeport with 15,434, Hartford 1.3 million, New Haven 573,000, Stamford almost 1.2, Waterbury almost $7 million. So I cannot explain how Waterbury received an increase of almost 7 million and Bridgeport only 15.4 thousand.
Does anybody else have any questions? Mr. Benahan?
I don't have a question, but Ms. Siegel, I know you for so many years before I was a board member, and now you always do a report. I always ask this question, and this is a question that everybody know. Why Bridgeport had to be less? Why Bridgeport had to be forget? Why Bridgeport they don't feel that they don't care that we need? I know Bridgeport, we are almost around 30 something school. We got some, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have almost 21,000 children. We are the city that we have more students than the other ones. And why they always treat us like we're not important? That's the way I see it. And I'm talking to you before I was a board member. We always got this issue. Every year we have this situation about the budget. Every year. It's something they really know. And you do your presentation and you do your budget more clear cannot be, because it's so clear that everything you present. So what can be the next step that can't understand we under, so we going crazy that we need more money.
It's clearly an inequitable situation, and this chart that I have on the screen illustrates the inequity. Hopefully the situation will improve for 23-24 through the advocacy efforts. There was a discussion at the breakfast, the legislative breakfast, that there was a discussion at the legislative breakfast about the FRPL count, which is the free and reduced lunch count. And we did receive a grant for which we're appreciative from the state of $200,000, which we're using to buy additional software and data management, and fund a portion of staff time to work on implementing that software to increase the counts to the maximum number for eligible students. So we're anticipating that when the state applies the formula in the current year, that there would be, a growth factor for Bridgeport. But even in prior years, there was always an inequity between and across the 5 peer districts. So the question of why still exists. It's inequitable. We have to continue to advocate for fair and equitable funding for Bridgeport.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hope this year they understand.
Baptiste Perez?
I have one question and one's more of a comment. The first thing is, how much are we allocating towards marketing the vacant pre-K seats? So I know Ms. Perrin during our Board of Ed meetings will mention it, but I'm trying to think of a ordinary, maybe someone new to Bridgeport walking down the streets. I don't see marketing. I don't see flyers. If I'm new to the city or I'm not that involved, I don't see it anywhere. And there's another New York reference, but everywhere in New York City, you'll see it on churches, you'll see it on the bus, you'll see it on the train, you'll see it on an app, you'll see a flyer that says scan here to learn about early pre-K and pre-K 3. And when I'm around Bridgeport, I see none of that. So how much do we allocate towards marketing, and whether we can market more on a wider scale? Just because I don't see that. So of course the seats be empty. And do we partner with any daycare, even though they kind of lose a seat?
Yeah, well, I can share what I know about it. The question should be directed to Superintendent and Melissa Jenkins, who's the Chief Academic Officer, and Melissa is overseeing the outreach efforts. I do have a prior email that I just brought up in my records that indicates, and this was dated in early October, they wrote that preschool enrollment flyers were placed in the Office of Student Choice at the district. They were provided to the school social worker at the consultation center, which is at Skane. They were also provided to the parent engagement coordinator in order for the LEAP home visitors to share with families who may have eligible children. Custom flyers with the school mascot were provided to Beardsley and Tisdale. So these are schools that at that time had higher numbers of open seats. And I do want to indicate that the number of open seats a few weeks ago was 23. So, many seats are filled, but we lose $600 in state funding per student per month for every seat that's open. So custom flyers were provided to Beardsley and Tisdale, and it says a request was made to each principal to post it weekly on their individual school parent square page and to post the flyers in key locations throughout their individual school buildings. So, and there may be many other measures that they've taken. I'm not privy to all of the individual steps, but there is much that can be done, within our existing resources.
Did I get the math right? It's $600 per vacancy per month?
For school readiness, and I believe it's the same for the state Smart Start program. It's $600 per child per month.
Okay.
Or for a full day program. So a child has to be in the seat, at least one day in the month in order for the district to receive the funding. Now that's the state funding. The number that I cited earlier included the loss of revenue, but even if every seat were filled, we would still be subsidizing pre-K. And every year that I've been in the district, we have been subsidizing pre-K. We fund classes in Title I because the grant, the school readiness grant and the Smart Start grant combined don't provide sufficient funding. And the state is providing in school readiness $108,000 for each class. So that's which is based on 18 students at the $6,000 rate. So $108,000 does not fund fully the cost of a teacher and a paraprofessional.
Got it.
Right. So even if every seat were filled, which is our goal, and it's our goal first and foremost, so that children who can benefit from the service are enrolled. That's our primary goal. And when that happens, we receive full funding. However, the funding that the state allocates is insufficient to fund the program. It has never been sufficient. And the gap grows each year.
Ben, I just want to pivot to my last comment. Not necessarily a question regarding the ARPSR funds. So they're done September 30th, 2024. When September 20th, 2000 or September 30th, 2024 comes, hypothetically, if we don't receive the additional funds we have, we will have to let go of the 10 guidance counselors, the 11 social workers, the FAME Academy program at Hartford, Hardin High School. I'm saying Hartford High School, Hardin High School, all the services listed on page 20 of the PowerPoint, correct?
Well, we would be planning for the elimination of those services in the 23-24 school year. We could not maintain positions in the month of September and then eliminate them. We would have to start the elimination process in the spring. It would be part of the allocation process, and we would identify staff in excess. If vacancies existed in allocated positions, meaning funded positions, then those in excess due to lack of funding in the grants would be moved into those positions. There could be potentially layoffs, based on least seniority. But we would be planning next year for the eventual end of ESSER funding, and annual positions such as teachers, guidance counselors, social workers, those positions would in effect end in June.
I have a follow-up question to that. So our ask in the operational budget, that doesn't include trying to maintain those programs.
No, the budget request for next year is for 23-24. So we still have ESSER funding in 23-24. The budget request pertains to the operating needs alone, the core operating needs. All of the services that we added in ESSER, the counselors, the social workers, the what we call the easy teachers, the ASI teachers, the elementary academic support instructors, the teacher leader model, all of the funds for facilities, for technology, for curriculum renewal, all of those funds would no longer exist.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to piggyback off that for 1 second. That doesn't really tell the whole story. The grant fund, the ESSER grant funded positions aren't really going to be the only things to go away should we not receive adequate funding to make up for that. We've also got the expiration of the internal service fund being depleted, and any position that you shifted where allowable to those grant funds will no longer be affordable as well. So we're going to be...
Well, that's right. So the fiscal cliff is projected to arrive in 24-25 with the expiration of ESSER funding. Not only do the ESSER funded services disappear, but the access that we now have to a fund source through ESSER to offset the cost of various services that we would traditionally fund through operating revenue, that source of funding no longer exists. So right. As I indicated in the talking points, the we 24-25 is the year in which there is a return to not being able to function with available revenue. Right now, we're projected to withdraw $9 million from the ISF funds for this year. So if that in the end is the number, then there would be about 18 million remaining. If we have to use, again, hypothetically, if we have to use 12 million of that 18 million or 14 million of that 18 million, then going into the fiscal cliff year, there's only a few million remaining, right? If the need at that point is $30 million, we will have a significant shortfall.
Yeah, and I mention this because I think I'm likely the only sitting member that actually had to make cuts to the budget and vote on eliminating positions. And it was my first few years up until, I think the last year we made cuts was to positions was the 18-19 school year. And then COVID hit. And right now we're experiencing, strange to hear and say, is COVID silver lining, which is going to be back. So we're going to go back to the 2018-2019 budget cut years and start cutting from what we lost there. It is my guesstimate.
Yeah. Now I do want to indicate that we are taking every possible step to leverage our resources in order to strive, without any guarantees, but strive to minimize the amount of the withdrawal from the ISF and thereby conserve funds in the ISF. And our efforts are vigorous in the current year, and whatever the outcome is for this year, we will continue those efforts in the new year. So we are leveraging new grants. So if we get a new grant and there is an existing staff member who is spending time managing that grant, and the grant allows for charging of a portion of that person's salary to that grant, we are doing that in order to reduce the charge to the operating budget and thereby conserve funds in the internal service fund account, right? We also, as I stated when I presented the GAP plan, in the food and nutrition service budget, we manage that budget so that we can make a contribution at the end of the year to the ISF for the health insurance for the food and nutrition retirees. We make a payment in July from our budget into the ISF for all retirees. So we pay up front. At the end of the year, we transfer surplus funds from the food nutrition budget into the ISF to pay for the food nutrition retirees. So at that point, the food nutrition contribution is compensating the board for the payment we already made, right? So the contribution we make at the end of the year, in effect, belongs to the Board of Education, right? So assuming I'm able to do that again, it's built into the plan. I would be adding $1 million, $800,000 to $1 million at the end of this year during the close period in the summer into the ISF, and those funds will belong to the Board of Education, right? Awesome. So there are many factors that are operating simultaneously, and I'm still anticipating there's going to be a gap. But we are taking every possible measure to keep that gap to the lowest possible level.
I don't doubt it.
Okay. Do you need to pass a motion to present the budget to the full board?
Yes, ma'am, you are correct. I'll entertain a motion to have this budget, Mr. Benahan.
I don't know if it's correct to ask you this, but it's a simple question, Ms. Siegel.
Yes,
That I don't know if you can answer me. I don't know who, but now we're talking about the budget. When we got the field, we got the high school, and all this light is on, and I know they pay for it. Where'd that money go? Let's give example. Harding High School had the big, is almost the time the light is on. They pay for whoever used the field. Some private team come. Where'd that money go when they get paid?
If Mr. Bennett, if we could respectfully hold off on that till the next meeting, because we're gonna do the.
Okay, no, that's fine.
facilities-
I just want to know if it's correct. No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so.
Sorry for that.
Motion to pass the 2023, 2024 operating budget request
To refer to the board.
to the full board, as a referral to the full board.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Ms. Brown, could you see that gets on the agenda, please?
Will do. If you can just email me proper language. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, next item on the agenda is the food and nutrition budget presented by Ms. Siegel. You may begin.
all right, thank you. I just need a moment in order to share the appropriate report. Not working, so I'm gonna try it a different way. All right. Before I begin,
Miss Perry is gonna give.
before I begin, I just want to make sure that I introduce the members of the finance team who are on the call. And I'm going to start with Keoma Steele, who is the Director of Food and Nutrition Services. And Patricia St. Louis is here, the Manager of Budget and Financial Reporting. And Nadira Clark, of course, is our Director of Grants and Financial Management. So should I wait for Mr. Sokolovic?
I believe so. You like 1 or 2 minutes.
Waiting for you.
All right. So I want to indicate at the outset that when we prepare the budget plan for the Food and Nutrition Services Department, it's very important to understand, once again, that Food and Nutrition Services is funded fully, 100%, by state and federal funding, specifically reimbursements received for meal service. And all of our students, 100% of our students, received free breakfast and free lunch. And so Food and Nutrition operates as a business, in effect. It's a profit and loss operation in which we generate profit. We spend up to the limit of our revenue. Now, the budget plan, the reason this is called a plan and not a request, is because we are indicating to the city a number that will go into the munis system as the upper limit for setting up the budget. We have to establish a number or an upper limit so that we can set up the budget. But that is with the understanding that we're only going to spend up to the amount of actual revenue we receive. And so this chart is showing a comparison between the 23-24 projected budget and several prior years, including the current year based on current information as of mid-year. And for 23-24, we're going to ask the city to set up the number of $25,613,000. Do we expect at this point that revenue will reach that level? No, we do not. We think that it will probably be in the range of 20 to 21 million. However, in prior years, there were some supplemental allocations. In the current year, we are receiving a supply chain assistance fund allocation. For next year, we're projecting, at this point, we're not going to receive any supplemental allocations, but there's always the possibility that there could be some supplemental allocations, or that the percentage increase in the reimbursement rates could be higher than anticipated. But currently, in order to ensure that we establish a number that is higher than the amount of revenue, we think that 25,613,000 is a good number. We always want the number to be higher so that we can set up the budget. We don't want it to be lower, because then we have to short lines and take various fiscal management steps in order to manage the budget, which make it more complex than it already is. So in order to keep it less complex, we try to request a number that will be higher than the actual revenue. And that is why in this top section for the revenue projection, you see on this red line, it's labeled munis, not to be expended. So this is where we put unrealized revenue. So at this point, our projection for unrealized revenue in the plan would be about 4.8 million. But as I said, the actual revenue may be somewhere between 20 and 21, maybe it'll be 21.5. So then this number on the unrealized line will be lower. Once again, I'm emphasizing we only spend up to the level of revenue. The bottom section is showing the initial projections on the various lines. And of course, it's going to balance. And you can see here on the health insurance line that currently I have 1.9 million, which would include the amount needed for actual health insurance, plus a balance that would be transferred into the ISF at the end of the year to repay the Board of Education for the cost of the health insurance for food and nutrition retirees. And as indicated, the number balances. So that is the plan. we're required to present it to the board for approval. All you're really approving is the number that we're requesting. And once again, I'm emphasizing that it's just a number. I call it an artificial number because it doesn't reflect the actual the actual revenue or the actual expenditures. It's a number that we establish in order to set up the budget, and we want that number to be higher than the actual amount of revenue. We will only spend up to the amount of revenue. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Macaron?
No questions. Thank you.
Baptiste Perez?
No questions.
Mr. Benahan?
Yes, I have one question, Mr. Go. When I know they need to report that when they waste food, they know how much money is wasting. You know, like for me, look like they're throwing money in the garbage. You don't know how much they waste.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Mr. Steele, who's on the call, to respond to the question. Mr. Benahan, Pioma, can you come off of mute, please?
Yes. Basically, we're doing offer versus serve. So once we serve the students a reimbursable meal, that meal is considered, basically, we're going to get paid for that meal. So unfortunately, even though they are throwing it in the trash, we just have to come up with a better option for them to eat the meals instead of doing that.
You got it?
No, a little confused.
What he's saying is, while the food is wasted, it doesn't impact the budget and it's still counted as a meal that's sold and we get reimbursed
Okay.
for that meal.
Oh, okay, all right, gotcha now, all right,
Correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
all right, thank you. No more questions, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Brown?
No questions.
And I have no questions. I'll entertain a motion to send to the full board for approval the 23-24 Food and Nutrition Service Budget Plan.
Motion to refer to the full board the 23-24 Food and Nutrition Service Plan, Budget Plan.
And I'll second that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Ms. Brown, I'll send that to you. If you can get that on the next agenda, please.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on a forensic or expanded audit of Bridgeport finances for the past 3 to 5 years. The reason I brought this is I know a forensic audit is usually to look for fraud. I put it in quotations because I'm not really suspecting any kind of fraud, but I do believe we do need to expand our audit, especially going into this advocacy period for more funding, because we always hear, where's the money go? Is it being properly spent? And I believe it would be a very good investment to put at ease a lot of the minds who always suspect chicanery going on with our budget. And perhaps we could even find some efficiencies or better check on our financial controls, because as we're all in positions for a certain amount of time, we become routine, and there may be some things we can learn. So I was trying to get a feel for everybody's taste for doing such an audit. It's been called for in the community.
Well, I just want to indicate, if I may, that the district undergoes an annual mandatory comprehensive financial audit each year. And it's conducted by an independent audit firm, the same firm that conducts the audit of city finances in accordance with generally accepted accounting standards. The audit firm currently is CLA, Clifton Lawson Allen, which has a city contract. In addition to the annual audit, the firm also conducts the audit of EFS, the Education Finance System, and special education excess cost, as mandated by the state. And that is done in accordance with agreed upon procedures. In addition, CLA, the audit firm, conducts the mandated federal and state single audits. So we're undergoing a significant amount of auditing. The audit process begins in June and it continues through October and into December for selection of samples, collection of data by the auditors, discussions with staff, and finalization of the audit, and ultimately the submission of the audited EFS reports by January 1st for the prior year. I shared with you the annual financial review, as well as the state single audit, in which several of the grants, including Alliance, are listed. And I shared with you the email that Ken Flato wrote when he shared with the entire city team, as well as our team, the annual financial statements. And he wrote a clean and successful audit once again. And he's presenting the report with the auditors at the council BAC meeting in early February. There's also a federal single audit that will be completed sometime in March by the auditors. So this occurs every year. It takes a considerable amount of time, not only the part of the auditors, but the part of our team as well, because the auditors operate using sampling. So they may pull, for example, certain personnel records, and then they request the documentation for those records. So our payroll office has to pull the documentation. And it has always been, as Ken stated, clean and successful. The annual financial review is posted to the city website each year. It includes the Board of Education because we are a department of the city. They cannot tell us how to spend money, but nevertheless, we are a department of the city and we receive a significant amount of money in terms of a percentage of the city budget. The report on the EFS and special ed excess cost audit is also in your packets. I included the state single audit report. As noted, the federal audit report is not yet complete, and there weren't any findings. So we operate with fiscal integrity. We have exemplary fiscal controls. I think you're aware that when I came into this district in 2012, I discovered that the district at that time lacked basic standard operating procedures. There was not any position control in place. There was a lack of coordination, communication, and collaboration across offices. And there certainly was a lack of internal controls to ensure a proper workflow at that time. And I have introduced those procedures and all the controls and the underlying systems in conjunction with my outstanding team, some of whom are on this call. So we operate as a team, and everyone operates with integrity and dedication to enforcement of the controls and compliance with all of the rules and regulations. Now, if you wanted to conduct some type of well, let me just say this. We should not be using the term forensic. Forensic applies when there is a search for information related to a legal proceeding. That is not the case. And so we should not be using the term forensic. It's important for the public to understand that the district undergoes the annual mandatory comprehensive financial audit each year, which has multiple components. And we have passed. If there were any findings, we would be sharing those findings and indicating the corrective action plan, but there have not been any findings. So I don't think there's a need to expend or to consider the expenditure of district funds for any other type of audit.
Okay, let me restate that I have no doubt of the integrity of our team. This is not a reflection upon you. This is something the community has asked for expanded services. They always using the term forensic. I understand the difference. How long have we been using the same firm to audit our books?
Well, actually, the city goes out for bid and selects a firm. CLA was, they had another name before. There was, I'm just not recalling it. But, CLA Clifton Lawson Allen took over the firm that was previously in place. Ken Flato did indicate that the contract will expire in June, and he will be issuing a new bid. I think in reference to your first point, Mr. Kalvik, the public doesn't understand that the district does undergo an annual mandatory comprehensive financial audit each year. And I think it's important to communicate clearly and emphatically that we do. And we are subject to intense scrutiny.
Because my concerns are, even with these things in place, there are examples in the recent past where, whether it's the fault of the Board of Education or department heads, where we smack dab in the middle of a contract before it even comes to us. And a lot of contracts with the people questioning the ESSER funds and how those were expended. And I think it will go a lot towards calming the public trust to review some of our contract awards going back, perhaps a larger sample size than has been done in the past. Some of our procedures as far as things the superintendent might approve and what would be done there and what kind of controls are there if the superintendent signs off on a contract where the board doesn't approve it. And I mean, because those are places where we could be vulnerable and might be ripe for chicanery. Not that there's anything going on, but it's something that needs to be actually looked at, because I mean, and that's just my opinion. I'll hear from the rest of the committee, see how they feel about it. Ms. Baptiste Perez.
In particular with the ARP ESSER funds, there's been numerous inquiries as to how the funds have been spent. And as a board member, for me, it's been really difficult to explain how with the $144 million, we only got 10 social workers for 38 buildings. And so for particular areas of interest in the community, those kind of numbers don't necessarily make sense, because there may be community sentiments that when the public hearing for how those funds were supposed to be expended, for especially the social and emotional component, arguably we have, and by we I mean most of the community members that I've spoken to have not seen any change, but we hear 10 social workers for 38 buildings. So that kind of allocation of funds doesn't add up, especially to the community need in a city like Bridgeport. And we just don't see the numbers. I'm not a numbers person. I don't necessarily see the numbers, and I'm given the same generic answer. There was another point in bringing it up, but this is aligned to when I chaired this committee, the facilities costs. How much from our ARP? I think a lot of the audit requests in my limited time on the board is more related to the money allocated to our ARP ESSER funds, where community members can see it. For the social emotional component, most 10 social workers do not solve the plethora of issues in 38 buildings that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. And for the facilities aspect of it, when we get emails that schools are shutting, what was fixed? And those are reasonable and I think fair inquiries from the public.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say those are reasonable and fair inquiries from the public, where it's just very specific.
Right, but those are internal inquiries. I mean, we presented in the first year, in conjunction with the former superintendent, the allocation of resources. We presented a PowerPoint that explained all of the services that would be provided. I mean, there was $23.7 million allocated to facilities. There was, I have to check the exact number, but well over 10 to 15 million for technology. There were additional social workers, additional guidance counselors. There were 45 easy teachers. There's the teacher leader model. There was $2 million expended for the bonus payment, called the pandemic retention bonus. So all of these major expenditures were presented with full disclosure and full transparency at the start of the process. And there is required reporting that Nadira can speak about to the state and the federal government on the use of these funds. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is, you may have a request for a report or information report, a data request in particular areas that we can generate.
I will say this, Ms. Siegel. I never would have thought of using that terminology. And so maybe that's potentially what's being asked is a data request of how it's allocated, what's allocated towards the social emotional. How much are these 10 social workers being paid? What else goes into that bucket of ARPS? Or because I definitely know with the easy teachers, like how many they are and they're in the schools, but
yeah, there's over 40, approximately 40 easy teachers. But keep in mind that a teacher, depending on the salary, with health insurance and benefits, could be $120,000, right? So if you have 10, that's $1.2 million alone.
Yeah, but is a social worker in the same bracket as a teacher? That's a
social worker is a teacher. They're all
okay,
covered by the teacher's salary scale. Yes. And keep in mind that we funded these positions for 3 years. So the cost factor in 1 year might sound relatively low in comparison with $100 million, but you have to multiply that by 3 with escalated cost.
Yeah, but you see how you broke that down, and I was able to see a trend and then see, oh, that's 3,
Yeah, I mean, if
that kind of data request, I think is what's, in terms of ARPS or funds, is what I was aligning my committee, when I ran this committee agenda to see.
Remember also that we're off. I have spoken to, at the finance meetings and board meetings frequently about how we're using some of the funding to offset costs that, if we didn't have ESSER funding, would be operating expenses, particularly in the area of special education. So I have 8 special ed teachers in ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER. 8 teachers in ESSER 2 in the first 2 years, and then in the 3rd year in ARP ESSER, because we had to increase the number of resource teachers. I have ESL teachers funded in the grant. We also are funding contracted psychologists, contracted speech teachers, and nursing staff, contracted nursing staff in the grant. We had to hire, I mentioned earlier, additional occupational therapists. Well, I had to fund that in the ESSER grant because I don't have sufficient operating funds to do it. So there's a multitude of services in the in the grant that we are funding in order to help offset the operating expenses, right? But I think, again, what you're what you are citing is an interest in receiving some additional information. And we just need enough lead time because, you know, we're dealing with our daily operations. And I in particular focus with my team on making sure that we spend every dollar in ESSER 2, which is going to end on September 30th of 2023. So every day I'm monitoring those accounts and reaching out to the individuals who are responsible for certain components and making sure that they are preparing their orders and submitting those orders. You know, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking of some of the other programs that are funded. We have the FAME Academy that Sarah Jane Henry operates. We have a adaptive arts program, which is only one teacher, but it's a special ed teacher, also created by and being managed by Sarah Jane Henry as the Director of Visual and Performing Arts. So these are other programs. There were a number of district staff positions that were included in the grant, including a supervisor in the data management office. We had to add 2 positions in the business office for accounting specialists in order to process all the additional orders. Now, when ESSER ends, those positions will end, but we're aware of that. And what we will do is, as attrition occurs, we will most likely move those individuals into the regular positions that are vacated. So hopefully all will work out as we would like, meaning the attrition will occur at the appropriate point. There were a number of assistant principal positions established in the grant. So I'm just looking at my list because my list also includes SIG funding, but let's see, I have a number 14 here. Let's see, 14. I just need to see if I need to remove. I would remove 3. I have 11 assistant principal positions or supervisor positions in ESSER grants. One is actually in the ESSER JDC grant. So I believe there's 10 in in ARP ESSER. So in addition to teaching positions, the supplemental teachers, the social workers, the counselors, there are also administrator positions that would no longer be funded once the grant ends. Right? We just put through various curriculum orders, which did not have to go to the board under the rules, but by that I mean there's a what's called digital DIBBLES. The DIBBLES is the early childhood assessment tool, and the chief academic officer requested, with the approval of the superintendent, that we move to a digital model. So we just put through a 5-year plan for that, funded through ESSER, and that was about I think that was either $500,000 or $600,000, and we also just purchased an expansion of Lexia, which is a digital service to help children who need additional reading support. And that's a program that was requested for the L students. So that was over $500,000. So in the curriculum component, we're using the funds that we set up originally for curriculum renewal, but we could not specify a year and a half ago exactly how they would be used, and now they are being applied. So we also have to have some level of discretion in order to meet emergent needs, both those that are mandated as well as discretionary.
Anything else?
No,
All right,
thank you.
Right, before I go to Mr. Macaron, I'm going to redirect conversation to the topic at hand, which is expanding our audits, with the intention being, much like a private company going public, how they would have their books audited, because that's what in effect we're doing. We're asking for a significant investment from the community.
Well, I don't know what you want to. I don't know what you want to look at. You need to be.
Ms. Siegel, could you please hold on?
I'm sorry,
speaking, and I'm going to address Mr. Macaron in a second, so he could ask the question. I'm looking for an expanded audit of our books in order to create public confidence to invest new dollars in our company, in our firm. When a private firm does that, a private firm audits the books. And the current accountants do not get upset that they're having their books audited or feel threatened or feel like their integrity is being questioned. It's just a matter of course to get those books confirm that they're good, to confirm the good work they're doing, to confirm that the company is doing well. And that is the intention of this, not to slight anybody, not to say anybody's doing a bad job. And if everything is A-OK, I think it's a very worthy investment to get a stamp of approval, 100%. You spent this $300 million perfectly. So when we go ask for an additional $30, $40 million down the line and say, hey, these people spent this money, great and awesome. Right now, we got the same books being reviewed over and over, but it sounds like the same firm that changed their name for I don't know how many years. This fresh set of eyes giving us the seal of approval will go a long way to getting more money for the district. Now, with that being said, Mr. Macaron, do you have any thoughts or opinions on the possibility of expanding our audit services for the books, Bridgeport Public Schools?
Well, Joe, the way you put that out, I mean, I could understand why we might want to do something like what you described. However, all due respect to Marlene, the city and the district, the audit that's done by CLA, I guess that's the name of the firm, is that right? CLA?
Yes, yes.
Okay. They're required to perform this particular audit, and special reviews of different areas of the city and the district. And so I think that that would be sufficient, but maybe Joe, you might have a good idea of perhaps making, doing something like you want to do to make the community feel more, I guess make the community feel better about our finances and how we're spending our money and all that good stuff. Does that help?
Yes, and now thank you, Ms. Brown. Yeah.
Sorry, my screen broke. I apologize. So for me, I definitely would like to see that report, the report that lines out where the ESSER funds are going. I think that would be very beneficial as well. Just to, I'm not sure if that's a line by line type of thing, but to Ms. Baptiste-Perez's point, I think it helps us understand all of these different changes that are taking place, and seeing them visually helps as well. And that also helps us to be able to say to anyone that's inquiring concerning that specific side of the funds that we've received, where it is and what it looks like for those particular places that the money is. So that's my point on there. I do understand where you are coming from, Joe, but I'm interested to see, for me personally, the ESSER funds has been a major topic of discussion, but that's pretty much my thoughts on it. And I'll just leave it up to your committee to see how you guys move forward with it.
Well, the ESSER funds are going to be reported on either way, without a doubt. We had the ESSER 1 closed out and complete, and there is a line-by-line itemization somewhere that was presented to the committee. I don't know if it's gotten on the website just yet, and we've been doing the same thing, close out ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. At least it's my intentions through this committee to do that when that comes up. Has ESSER 1 been posted yet, Ms. Siegel?
Nadira would have to indicate whether the final report was prepared. I believe was Nadira.
So we have sent it to the state and we did not post it on the district's website. If you would like it up there, we certainly can put it up. It's not something we've typically done before. The mandate under ESSER was that we put up our return to school. A copy of the proposal is there, but not the reports that were submitted.
But I believe that would be beneficial to the public and go part of the way towards the intentions of this exercise. Trying to think.
Okay.
No,
But again, I do not know what, you have not specified what you would want a firm to do. And if you're not proposing that CLA do it under the city contract, then you would have to write an RFP or an RFQ and go out for bid, because the cost factor would most likely be anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000.
Mr. Benahan, yes, I'll get back. Let's just hear from Mr. Benahan first.
Oh, listen to all of you and everything. So, and this is something that every year we're going through. This is something that people know what we need, where the money, how we spend it. And sometimes people, they think we're not spending the money the way it's supposed to be. And we always short. And the last thing we want to do is give layoff, because I know it's hard. It's hard to give layoff to people. It's hard to say we have to close the school because the budget. So, I'm agree with all of you. So, but it's something that they know. I always say this, they know the city, they know the Hartford, they know what we need, for the best and benefit in future for our kids. That's the only thing I can say.
It sounds like there's some tastes, at least I don't know, sounds like macaron. Mr. Macaron has some taste for it. I have some taste for it. I'm not too sure about you, Ms. Perez, Baptiste Perez, if you think this merits further discussion or not, because we could always bring it back if as a committee to discuss the scope of services we would be looking for in an expanded audit, and then if it's decided that the committee wants to go in that direction by majority vote or what have you, we could discuss the scope of services and then issue an RFP once we have the scope of services done. Perhaps kick it to contracts after that.
Yeah, we would definitely need to have a discussion regarding the scope of services before necessarily moving forward. Like I stated, my understanding was just with the allocation of ARP ESSER funds, and that's a data request.
Right.
But if $100,000 to a district struggling financially, that's a hard cost. But I would need more time to consider it.
Okay. So I'll propose a motion to postpone this item to develop scope of services to be put on the agenda at the next finance meeting.
So just tabling it to the next finance meeting after further just
Correct.
development of the scope. All right.
So moved. Second.
I
I'm sorry.
didn't so move it.
Okay. So.
Is a motion to table until the next finance committee meeting. This agenda item regarding the forensic audit until the next finance meeting, subject to discussions regarding the scope.
And second.
I would appreciate, if I may, not using the term forensic. I think it gives a very false impression.
I'll keep that in mind. That's why it's in quotations, because it's what the public would recognize. And I do understand it's an expanded audit. And once again, it's not a question of anybody's integrity on the finance team. I have the most respect for everybody on the finance team. I've worked with all y'all for quite a few years already, and I have nothing but the most respect for the integrity of the team.
Can I make an amendment to the motion?
What's the second?
You,
Oh, it's not. Yes, I must the second.
Mr. Macaron, can you can you go mute, please, Mr. Macaron?
I move,
You can remake the motion, just withdraw the motion or withdraw the second, just, I'd be cleaner.
no, that's lazy. That was the old administration. I move to amend the motion from forensic audit to expanded audit. Change the language.
Second,
I said,
All in
okay.
favor?
that's my
Aye.
line. Okay, motion carries. It'll be on the next agenda. Okay, thank you.
That was the amendment carries. Now you gotta do the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you are correct. Okay, all in favor on the main motion?
Aye.
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 Thank you for not making me restate it. Okay, next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on the proposed permit fees policy for fiscal year 23 to 27. Who's taking that again?
Yes, I'm going to bring the proposal up on the screen in a moment. And George, are you still here?
I am.
Very good, thank you. Just give me a moment, George. I'm going to find the document.
Sorry for keeping you last, Mr. Garcia. Next time you'll be first.
No worries.
I just have to locate it, George. 1 minute. I had it open, but all right. 1 moment. Let's find it. There it is. Okay. All right.
Mr. Macaron, could you please mute? Oh, you got it. This is asked. Thank you.
All right. So this is, let's see, I think this is the old one. This is the old one, so I need to get the new one. Sorry, I just need a minute. Need to get the new one. Okay. All right, I have it.
Okay.
All right. So on the screen is the proposed fee policy for the use of school facilities, starting in the current year, moving into 25-26. And the rates, we didn't bring to the board a change in rates for the current year, so that is why the first set of columns pertains to 21-22 and 22-23. But we are proposing a 3% increase in each of the following years. So I'll turn it over now to George.
So good evening, everyone. This is for approval or some action on the facilities usage policy. I'm sorry. So there's two buckets. The first bucket is outside agencies, folks that want to use our facilities that aren't from within. The second bucket is, the municipality, any school programs, school-based programs, which have an exemption. So the fee policy grid would be applicable to the first group, school-related agencies, federal, state, municipal agencies, non-school organizations, religious organizations. They would be subject to the fee policy. So in the fee policy, we have a building usage fee, custodial fee, and security fee. And then there's a host of, the overtime costs, holiday costs, depending on what day the usage is. The one thing that we are still working on, and we're waiting on some data from organization that we're part of, is the athletic field usage. It's twofold because we want to get some data on utilities in those areas because they're kind of different from the standard utility usages in other locations. So once we get that, we will bring that back to you all. But the escalation, like Marlene said, is 3% per year, and we would look for approval on this. Any questions?
Baptiste first.
Not at this moment.
Mr. Macaron? Mr. Macaron, if you're trying to speak, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
No
What
worries.
was the question?
Do you have any questions on the facilities
No,
presentation?
no, I don't. That's fine.
And I don't have any questions for this because we're gonna be bringing something like this back in the next meeting a bit more extensively as far as fees being paid and what have you. So
I have a question.
yes, Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Is a 3% increase fair with all the changes in like utility costs? I think Mr. Benahan had alluded earlier to we'll keep certain utilities running for organizations. Like, is that a fair projection that we're allowing other organizations to use our facilities, but we're not going in the red for someone else, I guess?
I think the 3% makes sense for everything outside of the athletic fields, just because the athletic fields, you know, you're talking about different utilities. So that's why we still have to get that data. We didn't want to just throw a number in there. We want to be accurate with that. But I feel the 3% is adequate at this point in time. I do think that in a future facilities committee meeting, I'd like to talk about the general usage of the buildings, because you know, we're starting to see an increase in usage, and it's starting to have an effect, you know, with our ability to sort of still manage our operations. But I think that, you know, we can take in a facilities committee meeting.
Say no more. I'm adding that now.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, I'm going to add that to my agenda.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
That's an area that we'd love to have a conversation.
All right. Ms. Brown?
I have no questions.
Yeah, I have a question. It may be in the documents, but I apologize. I didn't have a chance to read it as extensively as I would like. As far as the use of facilities costs, has there any of the staffing requirements changed? For instance, a couple hours for maintenance, security personnel?
At this point, we're seeing that it's pretty standard. The usage has been standard. I just think it's the amount of users at this point that, you know, we would like to discuss in a facilities committee meeting, just so I think we can put a little more structure around the usage. And one of the things that we would recommend is, you know, we like to bring in some software to manage this a little more succinctly. So like that is less time on the staff, because there's 3 buckets to this. There's athletics scheduling, there's the activities, school-based activities scheduling, and then there's the permitting. We had a meeting today to discuss portions of this. And the concern is the amount of time staff has to spend working on these different buckets that go into facilities usage. So, you know, it's something that, you know, we like to expand the conversation on.
Absolutely. I guess that's all I got for now, and we're gonna look at all the other things in probably the next meeting. So yeah, I guess we could entertain a motion to present to the full board the proposed permit fees policy change from fiscal years 23 to fiscal year 27.
Motion to approve to the full board the proposed permit fees for facilities for 2023 to 2027.
Have a second? I'll second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. You have,
Motion to
Present.
adjourn.
presented to the board, Ms. Brown, I'll send this to you as well to get on the next agenda.
Yes, please send me the agenda item.
Yes, ma'am. And we have a motion to adjourn. I shall second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion
Have a good
carries.
night.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you for your patience and your time. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.